pastor to know all of you by name and to be able to visit comfortably everybody in the congregation at some point in an annual cycle, then it's too big, and you need to divide your church and plant another church somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think, and maybe you won't agree with this, but I think there's almost an arrogance, and I'm not aiming this at any one man out there, but there's almost an arrogance to think that you're the only person who can actually preach the word, that God has raised up to preach the word. I mean, there are some men that are extremely gifted above and beyond anything that I will ever be, but it just seems to me to want to say, because people want to come and hear me, let's plant a campus over here and stream me in there, is saying God has not raised up sufficient men for pulpits. I mean, I was at a church that had 200 applicants for the pastoral position. So it seems to me that at least in the PCA, we have more men than pulpits, perhaps, and so I don't know. These are just things to think about. This is becoming very popular, so.
Yeah.
I'm very sympathetic with that view, actually, Nick. I think that it's got a lot to commend it. I think, though, that we perhaps shouldn't pin all the blame on the pastors in this situation.
No.
The big churches that I have knowledge of that have had difficulty planting churches elsewhere, it's often been an attachment by members of the congregation to the pastor that has meant they just can't get the volunteers to go elsewhere and plant a church. And that isn't really the pastor's fault. That comes down to the unhealthy, perhaps idolatrous attitude of congregants to their pastor. So, yeah, it's a complicated situation, I think, but I'm very sympathetic towards what you say. But I wouldn't want to pin all the blame on the pastor. I think congregations have to shoulder their share of the blame as well.
Right.
Now, we've spoken about celebrity, and we've spoken much about the church being influenced by media. Do we have any situation in the Reformation in which the church used media to influence the public, per se?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is the Reformation, if you like. The use of pamphlets is extremely important. And, of course, you've got to remember that even though the Reformation is a word-based movement, most people were still illiterate in the 16th century, so woodcuts and illustrations were crucially important for getting the message out. This is where I think Luther scores very highly, because he has an instinctive grasp of how to use the media. To me, one of the most brilliant moves Luther makes in the Reformation occurs in 1519, when the church is, actually 1518, I think. 1518, the church is struggling to know how to deal with him.
Yeah.
And a man called Cardinal Mazzolini produces a book entitled Against the Presumptuous Conclusions of Martin Luther. And Mazzolini says, he wrote this book in 3 days. Luther's such an idiot, I've knocked out this reputation of him in 3 days. When the book reaches Wittenberg, Luther's reaction is very interesting. Luther does not ban the book. He does not ask for the book to be burned. What he does is he reprints the book with his own reply in it, and also makes the aside comment that Mazzolini took 3 days to write this. Well, actually, I only took 2 days to write my response. What Luther does there is he uses the medium to subvert the medium.
Yes,
right.
Whereas the Catholic Church will put all of its energies in the 1520s into burning Luther's books and banning them. What Luther's doing, he's republishing Catholic books with Protestant introductions. He's subverting them.
He trumps them.
Luther's brilliant grasp of satire and of the nature of the printed medium that gives him the edge in those early years of the Reformation.
How influential was visual media? Could you describe this whole issue with the Boone Shoe? And was that what's going on with that in the power of the symbol of this terrorist group?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the Diet of Worms, 1521, after Luther has effectively stood trial and has been whisked off by Frederick the Wise, the Diet of Worms, it goes out with a whimper, not a bang, because overnight one night, a series of posters are placed around the city of Worms that simply display a peasant's boot, a shoe. And that was the symbol of a group called the Boone Shoe, which is a radical peasant revolutionary organization, the modern-day equivalent, if you like, of the IRA or of Al-Qaeda. And it really puts a great amount of fear into the delegates of the Diet of Worms, who sort of slink away quietly after this has happened, because it becomes evident to them that the terrorists are right there in the midst of them. This peasant group has infiltrated right to the very heart of this imperial Diet.
What was their motivation for doing that?
I think at that point in time, the peasant radicals see Luther as a champion of their cause. He's hitting out against the bloated corruption and overindulgence of the church. He's using the language of freedom. He's speaking the language of the common man. These are all things that resonate with the peasant radicals.
That's interesting. So they use a visual medium to spread their message without saying anything, thereby essentially making it possible for Luther to escape. Or to
Indeed.
Yeah.
It diverts attention from the Luther
attention.
problem, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we shouldn't, I mean, the visual media is, the irony of the Reformation is the Reformers are very suspicious, so say, of the visual, but they use the visual medium to present their case at every opportunity. The most famous example I can think of is Fox's Acts and Monuments, John Fox's Book of Martyrs, where the pictures were the things that made the impact on ordinary people. You know, the image of a young woman being burned at the stake and her baby bursting from her stomach and landing in the fire. That's what haunted the popular imagination. Interestingly enough, a bit like modern internet pictures. I mean, who knows if these woodcuts were true or not? There was a time when the camera didn't lie. Now the camera does lie.
That's all it does.
I was going to say, a doctored image on the internet can still, powerfully haunt somebody for years to come. Yeah,
we have, pictures of our president in Joker makeup and
oh yeah,
that kind of stuff didn't really happen. At least we think. Oh, that's interesting. But just to see the parallels. I mean, we just came off last year, another election year here in the United States, and the whole political process is just it is a manipulation of media in order to form public opinion. And it's interesting just to go back 500 years ago and to see the same elements there. Obviously, it's different, but to see the same type of thing going on with these two big institutions. Obviously, the magisterium and then the growing Protestant contingent. So,
it's interesting.
Go ahead, Dr. Trueman.
I'm sorry.
So I was going to say television, I think, has dramatically weakened the political process because it's focused on images rather than on substance. If you compare political debates and discussions of 50, 60 years ago with today, there is no comparison.
I think Postman made the case in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. He talked about the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which were famous senatorial debates for the Illinois Senate seat back in the 1860s. And they spoke of how the common person used to come to these debates and they would listen, and for 3 hours, one of the candidates would speak, and that was their introduction. Yeah. And the people were able to listen and to comprehend for 3 hours and follow an argument. And the striking thing is what we have with the last election. We have with CNN our ability as the common person not to go and to listen to a 3-hour sustained argument, but to submit our question in about 20 seconds worth of a YouTube clip and to hear about a 30-second response. I mean, the difference is amazing. Just when we think about the effects of media on epistemology, just to see how far we've come, devolving just in 150 years. Yeah.
I mean, talk radio accepted. The radio should be a much more intelligent medium of discourse, really, because there you're dealing, by and large, with raw ideas. Clearly, accents play some role. But by and large, if you listen to discussion on the radio, you're listening to a discussion. You're not worrying about the color of the guy's tie or whether his hair looks,
Well, it would really be
clean or dirty.
It would really be impossible for Abraham Lincoln to be president today. Just a hideous man.